Mrs. Nwosu had everything: a successful business, a luxurious home, and 3 beautiful children, David, Amoka, and little Zora. But with her husband always traveling and work piling up, she needed help. One rainy evening, she found a young girl standing outside her gated home, drenched and shivering. "Please, Ma," the girl said. "I need a job." Her name was Adanna. She had no family, no home, and nowhere to go. Moved by pity, Mrs. Nwosu took her in as a maid. At first, Adanna was perfect. She never complained, never got tired, and worked with eerie efficiency. The house had never been so spotless, the children never so well cared for. But something about her was off. She never ate with the family. She never slept at night. And sometimes, when Mrs. Nwosu passed by the maid's room, she heard something strange, like the slow, heavy drag of something against the tiles. One evening, Amoka burst into the living room, breathless. "Mommy." I saw Adanna's eyes change. Mrs. Nwosu frowned. "What are you talking about?" They turned yellow. And she was talking to something in her room. Mrs. Nwosu shook her head. "You've been watching too many movies." But that night, as she worked late in her study, a strange sound echoed through the quiet house. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't the hum of the air conditioner. It was something slow, heavy, sliding across the floor. Mrs. Nwosu's pulse quickened. The next morning, Zora was missing. Panic spread through the house. The security guards hadn't seen anything, and all the doors were still locked. Then Mrs. Nwosu noticed something strange: Adanna was missing too. A chill ran through her. Following pure instinct, she rushed to the basement. And there, in the dim light, she saw it. Adanna stood in the center of the cold concrete floor, her back turned. But as Mrs. Nwosu stepped closer, Adanna shifted, her lower half no longer legs but thick, coiled scales glistening under the dim light. Wrapped tightly in those coils, struggling to breathe, was little Zora. Mrs. Nwosu gasped. Adanna turned, her lips curling into a slow smile. "She is mine now." Mrs. Nwosu didn't think. She grabbed the metal rod from the wall and charged. She struck Adanna across the face. The blow should have knocked her down, but Adanna barely flinched. Instead, she let out a low, terrifying laugh. Her body slithered forward, growing. The walls trembled as her snake form stretched, fangs glistening. Zora let out a weak cry. Mrs. Nwosu's heart pounded. Desperate, she grabbed the emergency fire extinguisher and sprayed. A blinding cloud of white foam exploded into the room. Adanna shrieked, recoiling. Her scales sizzled where the chemical spray touched her skin. Mrs. Nwosu seized Zora and ran. She didn't stop until she was outside, screaming for help. When the police arrived, the basement was empty. No sign of Adanna. No sign of what had happened. But Mrs. Nwosu knew the truth. That night, as the city lights flickered outside her window, she sat awake, holding Zora close. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of street lights and security gates, something moved. Something slow. Something heavy. Waiting. The end.